Hello, welcome back to my channel, Reading with Opinions. My name is Emmy. I know that most of you have probably followed me from TikTok, which is where I make most, if not all, of my content. But recently I found myself putting out videos on TikTok that are definitely on the longer side, getting towards 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. And I figured that there is, an alternative platform for those types of videos. And I kind of want to see what happens if I give myself the creative freedom to kind of make a video as long as it needs to be without holding myself to a specific limit. There are a couple of deep dives that I've had in the back of my brain for a while. I do have the time to make them now, and I've figured that why not give myself the space and the time and the platform to actually be able to do those ideas justice. For today, I thought since I haven't posted on this platform in a hot minute, and the last video that I did was a hate read vlog, I thought it would be a good idea to just go over all of the 5-star reads that I have had for this year, 2025. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I am very, very precious with my 5-star reads. I'm very picky. I give a lot of books 4.75 stars because I'm just that anal about it, I guess. So for me, a 5-star read obviously means that I really, really love the book, but it also means that I think when I'm rating it, it is going to be a book that is an all-time favorite. I'm probably going to go back and reread it. And for me, it's in this upper echelon of books that I have read, one of the best books of all time, at least for me. So at the time of recording, this calendar year so far, I have read 117 books, which is a stupid amount, I know. I've really gotten into audiobooks this year, which has helped a lot, but also I've read a ton of shorter books, which has really helped me rack up the numbers, quite honestly. But of those 117 books, at the moment, I have rated 13 of those 5 stars this year. So let me go through them, tell you what I loved about them, and hopefully you can decide whether you'd like to pick them up or not. Let's go by genre, and I'm going to start with the sci-fi and fantasy books because that is probably my most read genre of all time. And we're going to start with one of the best fantasy books that I have ever read in probably my favorite fantasy trilogy that I have ever read, full stop, Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, which is the second book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. Now, Robin Hobb in general has quickly become one of my favorite writers of all time. I've only read her first trilogy, In the Realm of the Elderlings, the Farseer trilogy, and the second one, the Live Ship Traders trilogy. But even with that small amount of her bibliography, I'm just so incredibly enamored with her writing, and I just love her work. For those of you who haven't read her or haven't heard of her before, Hobb is primarily known for her character work. The way that she writes characters is the most visceral, real character exploration that I think I've ever had the pleasure of reading. I feel like I know these characters better than I know some members of my family. And not only do you get to know them really well, but they are incredibly complex. They are not perfect individuals, but even when they make mistakes, even when you don't agree with their decisions, you still understand where they're coming from. And some of the characters that I hated the most in these books, I did actually empathize with the most as well. Now, because she spends so much time on character exploration, the main criticism of Hobb's work that I have seen at least is that her books are very slow paced, which is why I haven't rated more of them 5 stars, quite frankly. It's always brilliant and I always love it, but sometimes the pacing of the works do get a little bit slow for my tastes. However, this book, Mad Ship, was I think over 800 pages and it did not feel that way at all. I thought the pacing was perfect and I loved every beat and every second of this story. This edition is 854 pages, worth every word. Very rarely do I read a fantasy book where I think this is absolutely perfect. I have no notes whatsoever, and this was one of them. I just absolutely adored the way that she explored all the storylines. I adored all the characters, and I just think she's a fantastic writer from top to bottom. Also in the fantasy sci-fi realm, we have 3 books from Dungeon Crawler Carl, books 1, 5, and 7, which in my opinion are the best 3 in the series. Dungeon Crawler Carl has taken the book side of the internet kind of by storm in the past year or so, at least it has on Book Talk. I'm not exactly sure about BookTube, to be frank. I'm re-entering the space, okay? Just give me some time. But for those of you who don't know, this is a lit RPG. We read from the perspective of Carl, who is just a normal guy, when suddenly Earth is abruptly turned into a video game style dungeon by aliens. It's structured very much in the way of a normal video game. There are levels, the characters level up, they get powers, and it's really this interesting mix, in my opinion, of fantasy elements and sci-fi elements. Now, I do have all of the physical copies. I did get them all as shelf trophies, but I should let you know that I did do all of these books on audio, and the audiobooks are some of the best that I have ever read, full stop. The narrator is so incredibly excellent that I actually did not realize that he was just one person doing all of the voices, because he commits so hard to it and you really feel like each character is being voiced by a separate person. Those of you who know me and know what I tend to read know that I am no stranger to what I would call silly, goofy, fun sci-fi, or fantasy for that matter. I love the Dresden Files. I love Project Hail Mary. I've really enjoyed the John Scalzi books that I've read. So everything in that vein that uses those fantasy and sci-fi elements, but also injects that really campy, fun sense of humor, I'm pretty much always here for. I'm really going to enjoy those books a lot. However, when you have that type of series where you're having silly, goofy fun and campy all the time, I do think that the series needs to evolve and to get more serious and have higher stakes the further you get into it. And I think the Dresden Files does that super well, and I also think Dungeon Crawler Carl has succeeded in that as well. The first book is very campy and goofy, and you're really just trying to figure out the world. There is a lot of teenage boy humor as well, I would say. Doesn't bother me personally. There were a couple of jokes that I didn't love, but I'd say the further you get into the series, the more that does disappear. And not only do the stakes get higher the further you get into the series, but Dinneman also touches on a lot more serious elements such as propaganda and censorship and just the role of media in our society and how it warps our perception. And I think he talks about those elements super well in this goofy sci-fi universe, and I really enjoyed reading these books. They're not going to be for everyone, especially because it is so campy and silly, but they're definitely for me, and I cannot wait for book 8 to come out. I think it comes out next May. So excited for that. Next is one of only 2 rereads on this list, which was The Hunger Games, the first book in the series. I reread the entire series because of the release of Sunrise on the Reaping. I hadn't read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I just decided, you know what, we're just going to start at the beginning of the series and I'll read it until the end. And while the newer books I didn't really love as much as the original trilogy, I do think that the original trilogy still very much stands on its own and is great, and especially the first book I kind of consider to be like the perfect YA dystopian book. It's accessible, it's appropriately horrifying, so it's not too horrifying that it shouldn't be read by teenagers basically, but it's horrifying enough that you understand the stakes. And I think overall what it says about censorship and propaganda and just the role in media and how it shapes our opinions is still a very, very profound message, and I think it is packaged incredibly well into this YA novel. As we all know, there were so many copycats after The Hunger Games first came out. We had Divergent, we had The Maze Runner. I've read a bunch of those series. Like, YA dystopia was so popular for so long. In my opinion, nothing has ever come close to touching The Hunger Games at all. Many have tried, few if any have succeeded. This is kind of a perfect book in my opinion. The rest of the trilogy I don't feel as strongly about, and the more spin-off-y books I really don't feel as strongly about, but this first one I still feel is excellent. And finally, for the fantasy books, though I would term this as more romantasy, we have Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher, who I've only now read 3 books from, but is fastly growing to be one of my favorite authors. In this book, we follow a woman, Hala, who has suddenly inherited her very wealthy uncle's estate, which her very obnoxious family is trying to steal from her. And she meets this guy named Sarkis, who has been trapped in a sword genie style for about 500 years. I love the chemistry between the two of them. I thought that their interactions were so incredibly funny and witty. This was a book that just had me smiling and kicking my feet and giggling. Like, I just had an amazing time reading this book. But also, I really appreciated that the characters in this book were my age. I'm in my 30s. They were in their 30s or their 500s, I guess. But it was such a pleasure to read a book that felt like it was catered more to me because I was the same age as the characters. But also, it was nice to see like people in their 30s falling in love. I'm kind of sick of reading about 19-year-olds falling in love. Like, they're allowed to too, but I want stories more from my demographic, and this really hit the mark for me. T. Kingfisher's writing is just so fun and whimsical. I loved all of the fantasy elements that she used, and I loved the diversity in the characters as well. One of the prominent side characters, his name was Zale, and they were a non-binary priest. It was such a pleasure to read about them, not just because they were non-binary, but because they were just a delight. And overall, this is my favorite romantasy book that I have ever read, and quite frankly, it's not even close. On Book Talk, I have had like a really hard time shutting up about how much I love this book. I just love it so much. It's amazing. Moving from romantasy right into romance, this is going to be the other reread on my list, which is The Grand Sophie by Georgette Heyer. So I always say this when I talk about this on my other accounts, but Georgette Heyer is known for writing extremely historically accurate Regency romances. So sometimes that means that there are elements in the romance that we as a modern reader would not deem to be appropriate. Sometimes that means they get married because their parents forced them to. Sometimes that means there's an age gap of like over 10 years. And in this case, that means that our couple are first cousins. Now, personally, I do not think that that actually detracts from the book at all, especially because this is completely spiceless. They don't even kiss until the very end, so like it doesn't matter all that much, quite honestly. If that's a turnoff for you, I completely get it. I just figured I would be upfront about that before like full recommending this to you, which I am going to do right now, but that is an element in this book, just so you know. So I said that this was a spiceless book, and to be honest, with some exceptions, I have begun to prefer those almost in my romances, which might be a whole other video topic now that I'm thinking about it. But basically, I do think that a lot of authors use the presence of spice to excuse away having to write actual chemistry and actual connections with their characters. I've just read so many romances in the past couple years where the chemistry basically aligns with, I think he's hot, I think she's hot, and then they have like really explicit sex together. And for me, in my romances, I need the tension, first of all, which like if you don't have spice, you have to write tension, but I also really need the banter. Like, I really need the banter. I'm not saying that I only read like enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers or anything like that, but for me, there always needs to be that tension and that little bit of conflict and the kind of clashing of wills against each other. And if it doesn't have that, I'm probably going to be kind of bored with the story. And this book, oh man, does it have banter? Oh man, does it have tension? It is so funny and so witty. And Sophie, especially the main character, is just one of the most delightful protagonists that I have ever read. As I said, Georgette Heyer does write historically accurate Regency romances, so this isn't going to be a Bridgerton-like story where the female protagonist is like flouting all Regency conventions, but everyone finds it charming for some reason. No, like Sophie very much adheres to the societal standards of the day. However, she is just so charming and delightful that she just skirts the line and kind of bends people to her will within the system. And the clashing of wills between Sophie and her love interest is just so delightful because he's not a dumb person, but she runs rings around him, and it is just so fun to read. If you have a problem with the first cousin thing, again, I do understand. There are other ones that I would recommend for sure, but personally, I just love this one. Next up, we have what is now the second newest Ali Hazelwood release. The newest one is Mate, and Problematic Summer Romance has now become my favorite of her works. Now, Ali Hazelwood has quickly become one of my auto-buy authors. I don't absolutely love every book that she's put out, and I think this actually might be the only one that I've ever given 5 stars, but even the ones that aren't exactly to my taste, I still relatively enjoy, and I know that she is going to give me at least a solid time. Now, unlike Georgette Heyer, Ali Hazelwood obviously does write quite a bit of spice. However, she also does write banter, and as I said, I do need the banter, and this book has some excellent banter. Now, this is an age gap romance, which I know some people won't be okay with. It also features the trope of older brother's best friend, which personally, I happen to eat that shit up. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a cliche. Now, the Hazelwood romances that I haven't loved as much, I have found that those are where she tries to get a little bit more serious with the themes that she explores, and I'm not opposed to her writing more serious books, but I do think that her strength lies in silly, fun, popcorn romances, quite honestly. And personally, I thought that this one was one of her most fun, if not the most fun romance that she has written. First of all, it is set mostly in Italy, which just provides this amazing, whimsical backdrop for the romance. Because of the age gap, there was that bit of forbidden element to the romance. It didn't get gross or weird at any point, at least it didn't to me. But that little, like, forbidden element is kind of fun. I don't know. Like, it just is. I don't give a lot of romances 5 stars, but overall, just because it was my favorite, like, silly, fun popcorn read that I think I've ever read, I felt like I had to give it 5 stars because I couldn't imagine a better book in that genre than this one. But yeah, great tension, great banter, love this one. It's not gonna be for everyone, but obviously I had a great time. And then the final book that's in the romance category, but also I think should be more in the literary fiction category, is going to be The Great BBL by Emily Henry. Emily Henry is obviously known for her romances. Some of my other favorite romances have been by Emily Henry. Book Lovers is amazing, Funny Story is amazing, like they're all at least good. And in this book, she kind of takes a turn into, again, the more literary fiction side of things. There is a romance, but I would definitely describe the romance more as a subplot. This book is mostly about a woman who is competing to be the biographer for a very well-known and private figure. And yes, it is the person that she's competing against that she does end up having this romance with. Overall, while I did enjoy the romance part, I enjoyed far more the main storyline of this interview with this woman who is very enigmatic and starts giving different and maybe conflicting information to the two people. It really reminded me of Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is a book that I liked, but I thought that this book just did that concept so much better. Maybe that's controversial. I know people love that book. I don't dislike it. Don't get mad. But for me, that format of going back and forth between the interviews and what is happening in the present and the way that Emily Henry interwove both of those stories, I thought was so incredibly well done. And I do hope that she keeps on writing romances because I love her just full out romances. But if she kept on writing books like this, I wouldn't be mad. I thought that this was fantastic. Next up is going to be probably the most emotionally impactful book that I've read all year, which is Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. As the title suggests, in this book we follow the life of Betty, who is a child that was born in the 1950s to a white mother and a Cherokee father. And as you can imagine, being born at that time with that racial makeup, she faces her fair amount of prejudice and hardship. So as I said, this book is heartbreaking and traumatic, and I would highly recommend checking your trigger warnings before you read this. But what makes it even more heartbreaking is that the author based it off of the real life story of her mother. And for me, that did add that extra little gut punch while I was reading, where I was like, it's not just the author's imagination, like she is depicting real life events that were absolutely horrific. I do want to be clear, even though there is a fair amount of trauma and pain, the reason that I gave this 5 stars wasn't because it just traumatized me so much, it is because it is so incredibly beautifully written. I think that might be my favorite type of book, where there are very significantly impactful events happening in the story, and maybe they're so hard to read that you kind of want to skim over them a little bit, but you can't because the prose and the way that the author uses words is just so incredibly beautiful. This book broke my heart open multiple times. It is the only book that I have ever read that made me cry while I was in public. And I very rarely cry at books anyways. I think this is the only one all year that's made me cry, and it just really did it for me. And I happened to be on an airplane. At least on my side of Book Talk, this has gotten to be talked about a lot. I don't know if it's made it to BookTube yet, and if this sounds at all appealing to you, I would really recommend checking this one out. Then the last fiction book that I have for you is My Friends by Frederick Bachman. This was actually the first work that I read from him, and now I need to read everything that he's read, I think. This is another book that really intertwines the past and the present. In part of the story, we follow a young girl who unexpectedly meets a famous artist on the street. And in the past, we follow that famous artist's early childhood and how he grew up and what influenced him to become the artist that he is today. That's a very loose summary, but I went into this book very blind, and I think that you should too. I think it's more impactful if you read it that way. I feel like I'm going to talk about this in a similar way that I talked about Betty, because again, the story is very impactful and very heartbreaking, though less trigger warnings than for Betty. But similar to Betty, though different, the way that the author uses words was just so incredibly beautiful and lovely, and that's really what made me love this book so much. Just to contrast the two a little bit, with Tiffany McDaniel, I think she uses words very creatively. Like, a lot of the things that she's depicting are very stark and very hard to read about, but the words that she uses are just lovely, and her prose is lovely, and she uses words in a very creative and interesting way. Now, with Bachman as a contrast, I think that he also uses words in a very lovely way, but for me, the loveliness really lies in the simplicity of his language. There's just something very crystal clear and open about the way that he uses words, and even though, again, the subject can be difficult, he writes it out so simply, but yet so beautifully. I also just love the story. I thought that the character work was just phenomenal, and I can't wait to get to more of his work. And then to wrap up the list, we have a couple of nonfiction books. First is Poet Square, a memoir in 30 Cats by Courtney Gustafson. Now, this is a book of essays written by a woman who is from Tucson, Arizona, that ended up renting a house that came with 30 feral cats. And it follows her journey with those cats and with her journey on TikTok, as she did become TikTok famous because of all those animals. And then it also delves deeper into her journey as a rescuer. She does go on to rescue a bunch of cats in Tucson and becomes very active in the Tucson rescue effort. And I just really enjoyed the way that she wrote both about the animals, but about rescuing in general. I initially picked this book up because until very recently, I did live in Tucson, Arizona, and I have cats. So I was like, why not give this a shot? I wasn't really expecting all that much from it, quite honestly, especially since I learned that she is TikTok famous. I have a very low standard for people who write books after they become social media famous. And so I was not expecting it to be this well written. I was not expecting it to be this profound. And also I was not expecting her to have such a frank and open take on animal rescue. There's one chapter in particular where she talks about how she was going to rescue animals in a very impoverished community and how she felt really off about it because there were humans that were obviously struggling, and here she was to feed the cats. I think it's so important to have those open and honest conversations about animal rescue. Like, it doesn't do us any good to pretend that those issues don't exist. But also the way that she wrote about it was so thoughtful and so respectful to everyone involved. And I just thought that this was a tremendous book, and I was so pleasantly surprised by this. I think that you should read this if A, you love cats, B, if you're from Tucson, and C, if you are really into memoirs or essay collections, anything kind of in that realm. I think you're really going to enjoy this, and I would highly recommend it. And then finally, this is also in my running for my favorite book of the year. We have The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. If that name sounds familiar to you, she is the author of Radium Girls, which I also did read this year and did also think was entirely excellent, though this is my favorite book of the two. This is a biography of a woman named Elizabeth Packard, who in the 1860s was imprisoned in a mental asylum by her husband because he did not like the opinions that she held and was expressing. And so, being possessed of intelligence and strong moral conviction, Elizabeth Packard fought the system from the inside to prove that no, she was not insane and women should have rights beyond those of their husbands. It follows her life before she was committed, it follows her life during, as she documented everything with meticulous detail, and then it follows her life after she was released and how she fought for other women to also be released as they had been wrongfully imprisoned as well. This is one of my favorite types of nonfiction books, which is a nonfiction book that is written like it is a novel. It is just so gripping and entertaining. It is not dry at all. Obviously, I own a hard copy, but I did initially read the audiobook, and the author narrates it, and she does a fantastic job. So either route you could go, I think they're both great. It's super well written. It is meticulously well researched. The bibliography in the back of this is absolutely insane. But this book also spotlights an incredible woman that I had no idea existed, but obviously fought for my rights and for my descendants' rights, which is something that is becoming increasingly more relevant as women's health is kind of being scaled back, at least in the United States. This is a book I would recommend to pretty much everyone, but especially read it if you just feel like being righteously angry for a while. I think this will do the trick. So those were all of my 5-star reads for the year so far. We still have a couple of months left, so I'm hoping to get a couple more in there before the end of the year. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I am going to try and post on this account a lot more going forward, but I would love to know in the comments if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. Did you also rate them 5 stars? Did you like them? Let me know in the comments.